You're listening to a social justice podcast, an exploration of our world's social issues, hosted by Nicola Spurling on the traditional and unceded territories of the Kwikwetlem, Katzie, and Qayqayt peoples. Hello, this is the Social Justice Podcast, and I'm your host, Nicola Spurling. And today we have a bit of a different episode. There are a number of topics that I want to cover, and it all stems from the fact that this podcast is no longer hosted by the Flag Shop. I no longer work for the Flag Shop. There are a lot of details around this that I'll be able to share with you in this episode. There are also a lot of details that I'm not going to be able to share for a variety of reasons, and I apologize for being vague, but I need to protect myself, so I need to be careful about how I present this conversation. But I think that you, as the audience of this podcast, should receive as much transparency as I can provide you with. I'm going to talk about what happened to the Flag Shop, what happened to the staff of the Flag Shop, what is happening with my coloring book that I created for the Flag Shop, as well as the trans lesbian flag that I designed for the Flag Shop. I'm going to talk about what's next for me, and I'm also going to talk about what happens to this podcast, so please stay tuned for that. First of all, what happened with the Flag Shop? It's a bit of a complicated story, and I'll do my best to explain. So the Flag Shop is a franchise, and we have, I guess I can't say we anymore. The Flag Shop had a variety of franchises across the country, which, as far as I'm aware, are still operating. So please, if you live in one of those cities other than Vancouver that has a Flag Shop, check in with them directly to see if they're still operating, because I definitely don't want to cost them any business if they are still in business and they're trying to make a go of it. Maybe their name is going to change, maybe it won't. I don't know how that's all going to play out. So please check in with them directly and don't rely on me for that information. The owner of the Flag Shop reached out to me in 2021, early 2021, and offered me a job as their social justice ambassador. So this was a role that, on the surface, was intended to give back to community. It was intended to improve the image of the Flag Shop, to help the Flag Shop attract clients that were queer-focused, I guess you could say, pride organizations. When I first joined the company, they had recently lost a huge order for flags from a pride organization in the US because they didn't have a queer liaison person on staff. So I was going to partly fill that role. I was partly going to help out with reviewing policies related to EDI within the organization, which I did. I don't know if any of that feedback was taken on board, but I did a review of policies. I created policies. I had designed some artwork related to being a trans person and a lesbian in response to a lot of hate that I was receiving online about, well, you're trans, you can't call yourself a lesbian, things of that nature. So I created this artwork as just something for myself. The owner of the Flag Shop saw it and said, I want to turn that into a flag. That was how the trans lesbian flag came to be. So that was, I would say, my first real project with the Flag Shop. I was also asked to create artwork that was wrapped around the building. I don't know what's going to happen with that artwork. It's still there as of now, but I imagine when a new tenant comes into the Flag Shop's building, that's going to be taken down. I really don't know the order to say things. I guess it's kind of clear from this point that the Flag Shop is not in business. At least the head office that I worked for is not in business. I'm trying to get to explaining what not being in business looks like. I don't really know how to label that, so bear with me as I try to get there. I'm just trying to set the groundwork for sort of how I became involved to begin with. Another part of the equation is that I was asked to create a coloring book called a social justice coloring book. Every page of that coloring book was dedicated to a different social issue. And that was how the podcast ended up being formed. Once the coloring book was made, I had a conversation with the owner of the Flag Shop about what direction we wanted to head in next. And I said, well, I would love to do a podcast. That was how this came to be. The first season was addressing every social issue that was in that coloring book, and then we've expanded from there. So basically, to get to why all of that has fallen apart and why I'm still doing this podcast, there's a few steps that we're going to have to go through. And like I said, I don't really know how to properly explain this because there are a lot of unanswered questions of my own. I guess I can start with when we started to find out that things were falling apart in a way. It was a number of months ago. We started discovering that the flag shop was having some financial difficulties. And this was something that was made clear to staff, although the details of that were not entirely clear. I was personally asked if I would be willing to accept a temporary layoff, I think it was, a temporary part-time layoff or something along those lines, essentially taking a huge reduction in the hours that I was working. And since this was my main job, that wasn't something that I could really agree to. So I didn't agree to that. I was of the mindset that I will either keep working in this position for however long it's able to sustain itself, if it is, or I will accept a layoff in full. And with that, obviously you can collect EI, which would help to support me in the meantime. I kind of expected at some point that I would receive notice that I was being laid off, but instead I was told one day that the doors of the flag shop were locked, that all of the items, the merchandise that the flag shop owned had been sold off to a competitor, that competitor's name being Flying Colors International, I believe. And basically it seemed like we didn't have jobs anymore. The difference, I guess, for me is that my job was always remote. It wasn't based out of the office. So while the locked doors potentially constituted a dismissal for the other staff members, for me, I was really unclear of what that meant. I tried reaching out to the owner of the flag shop, but I didn't get a response. I reached out to some of the other employees. They were similarly confused about everything that was going on. Everyone was scrambling to find lawyers, to contact employment standards, to basically figure out what do we do? Are we getting paid? How does this all work? Is the company going bankrupt? Was the company sold off? Honestly, I still don't have those answers. So I do know that I'm officially no longer employed. I think it was about a week and a half after the doors were locked. We actually got paid, but it was clear that that was the final payment that we would be receiving. So that was just our regular wages that were paid at that point. So we were then given an ROE, a record of employment, which is what is necessary to apply for EI. So for that week and a half, we were really unsure. Should we be applying for EI already? Are we getting an ROE? Will we get our final paycheck? We had no idea what was happening because the owner just wasn't responding and had removed all of us from social media, had blocked us on social media. We found out through other sources that the owner was in France. I don't know what we're supposed to do with that information. It looks like maybe they're trying to run away and not pay the staff what they're owed, or maybe just can't deal with the whole situation. I don't want to speculate too much on the motives for leaving for France and basically leaving us all high and dry trying to figure out what's going on, but it was definitely not appreciated. And I mean, part of the problem here is that the final wages is not everything that the employees are owed or feel entitled to or can receive compensation for. There are just a variety of ways that people can seek recourse. That could be by going to employment standards, by hiring a lawyer, going to small claims court. Right now, I can't talk too much about the specific actions that I'm taking or that other staff are taking, but there are actions being taken to try to receive compensation because there's things like outstanding vacation time. When I was laid off, I had something like 6 weeks of vacation time accumulated because I just hadn't really taken any vacations in the time that I was working for the company. There's also things like severance that are supposed to be paid. But obviously with the company being in financial difficulty, there are a series of obligations, a series of people that need to be paid or entities that need to be paid, and there's priority for that. My understanding of something like bankruptcy is that all the employee wages get paid first, and then all of the creditors get paid, and then things like severance and vacation get paid after that. And I could be wrong. That's just my understanding at this point. But as far as I'm aware, there have been no bankruptcy filings at this point. So the company technically hasn't gone bankrupt. There was also speculation that the company was going to be sold to this competitor, Flying Colours International. But as far as I'm aware, that fell through and that never happened either. So that's kind of why I'm struggling to figure out how to explain the situation that the business is in and that we're in, because we don't know the status of the business at the moment. And like I said, it sounds like the franchisors are still operating under the Flagshop name. I don't know how they have the rights to do that or for how long or how that's going to all play out. Anyway, I think that probably gives you a good enough summary of sort of what happened and where we are. So I want to talk about some of the projects that I was involved in that were, I guess you could say, bigger than the Flagshop, and what that is going to look like now, because some of that will carry on in some way. Some of it might not. Some of it I don't have the answers to. So to begin with, I want to talk about the Social Justice Coloring Book. That book was intended to generate awareness and generate money for Sage Community Food Bank. My whole goal with creating that was to educate the public around social issues, have people take this book, color in the pages, and in the process of doing that, spending hours coloring, reflect on the issue that is being portrayed on each page. That is something I believe in. I am very proud of that book. And that book was created while I was an employee of the Flagshop. So the rights to that book are, as far as I'm aware, owned by the Flagshop, and they have a contract with Transgender Publishing. They're willing to work with me on this, but I don't know what the future of that book looks like. I don't know if the owner of the Flagshop is going to continue to try to make a profit off of that book, because as far as I'm aware, Sage Community Food Bank didn't receive the funds that they were supposed to have received from the company. And I feel absolutely awful that that happened. There are copies at some local bookstores. It is still for sale on Amazon. If you purchase it, you will get the book, but I don't know where your money will go. So do with that information what you will. The other thing I want to talk about is the trans lesbian flag, which had a similar, albeit different, contract in place for it. That flag, because it was designed by me outside of working for the Flagshop, that is not necessarily owned by the Flagshop in the same way. The deal with that is normally if you create artwork and you sell it to an organization or a company, you create some sort of contract with them related to how that artwork can be used, who has the rights to use that artwork, in what way, and what's done with the money. Normally what would happen is an artist would get royalties for something like that. The agreement that I wanted is that I didn't want to make money off of the flag. I wanted all of the royalties that would have otherwise gone to me to go to Sage Community Food Bank. And again, I'm not aware that any of that money actually made it to Sage. That is a massive problem, because that means someone else is profiting off of my work in a way that they shouldn't be. That problem continues to exist even though the flag shop doesn't own the trans lesbian flag anymore, or at least the physical copies of it. I don't know how that's all going to play out with regard to the rights to create the trans lesbian flag and sell it, but the physical copies that were printed, and I believe 1,000 copies of that flag were printed, those were all at the flag shop at the time that the locks were changed and the merchandise was sold off to Flying Colours International. So Flying Colours now owns all of those physical copies of the flag that I designed, and I don't have a contract with them. I reached out to them about a month ago and I said, here's the situation. I had an agreement in place that all of the profits from this flag are supposed to go to Sage Community Food Bank, because again, it wasn't just the fact that whatever royalties I should have received are going to Sage, it was that the flag shop wasn't intending to make a profit off of it either. You can go and look at various social media posts. I've screenshotted those just in case I need that for reference later. On those flag shop social media accounts, it was advertised in that way. But I contacted them. They said, we don't have the capacity to deal with this right now. Contact us again in a month. Later this week, I have in my calendar to contact them again and to find out what's happening. I'm not the only artist in this position. Every other artist that I'm aware of who's in this position, I've reached out to. I've given them the information that I have. I've told them who they can contact at Flying Colours International or FCI, and they are, I guess, doing with that information whatever they need to do with that information. So if you see the trans lesbian flag for sale outside of FCI, I would appreciate it if you reached out to me to let me know, because that shouldn't happen. If you see that flag for sale from FCI, I would highly encourage you to ask them where the proceeds from that flag are going, especially if you're purchasing that flag. I want to make sure that that money gets in the proper hands of Sage Community Food Bank. They deserve that. That was always my intention, to support them through my artwork. If that's not happening, that absolutely breaks my heart. Now, what is next for me? I don't really know at this point. I haven't gotten my first EI check yet, but I have applied for EI. So I'm in the process of trying to find the next path. I don't know if that means trying to ramp up my construction company, which is something that I've done in the past. That's a difficult thing for me to do. I can do the management side of things. I can do permit applications, drafting, things of that nature, but that's not where the primary income from that business has been in the past. My primary business was doing hands-on construction work at different construction sites. The reason I say that that's difficult is I have bad shoulders. They are getting worse as I age. So from a succession planning standpoint, it doesn't make sense for me to do that physical construction work on a full-time basis. There might be a few projects here or there that I can do, but that's not the direction that I would take that company if I got it ramped up again. If I'm focusing on the management, on the drafting, on the permit applications, that's great, but it also is similar to sort of starting a new company in the sense that I need people to, instead of coming to me for the hands-on work, come to me for those other services. I need to advertise that. There's a lot of ramping up, and so it's not something where I can immediately start making good money doing that. The other option is I find another job. I'm certainly open to doing that as well. I just don't necessarily know what that job looks like, because I've worked as a project coordinator and a project manager in the construction field in the past. I like that work, and maybe that's work that I'll do again. I also have spent the last 3 years doing social justice advocacy work, working as a social justice ambassador. That's not a common job among other companies. So while it does exist, that's potentially a difficult path to follow. There's also different variations of that I could look into if my goal is to do a lot of this sort of advocacy work, and helping nonprofits is a big part of my life. I sit on a variety of boards. I've been doing that for going on, I think, a decade at this point. And that's something I'm really passionate about, but it's all volunteer work. It doesn't pay the bills. So maybe the path is that I need to find some kind of management job within a nonprofit organization so I can fulfill my need to make money and also my desire to do that type of work. I might have to restructure my life in some ways because the work I was doing at the flag shop was very flexible, and that allowed me to do a lot of the volunteer work that I do with meetings in the middle of the day on a weekday. If I get a 9-to-5 Monday to Friday job, that no longer becomes a reality, or it just becomes very difficult to sort of fulfill those obligations. The other thing that I could do is something completely different that, I haven't even thought of yet. Maybe starting up a different kind of company, or maybe getting a job doing something that's not even on my radar. Right now, I would say I'm quite confused. I have a number of organizations that I would love to work with, contacts that I can reach out to, and I'm in the process of making those connections. Just keeping my mind open to whatever possibilities might be out there, and knowing that I am a very hard worker. I have a huge amount of skills, and I need to try to not be stressed out about whether or not I can find work and focus more on finding the work that I want. I have the benefit of being somewhat financial stable, at least for the next little while. I can hopefully take a little bit of time with this and try to make sure I land in the right spot. At the same time, as a trans woman, there's always this fear of not being able to find work because I've been in that position. I was outed nationally when I ran for election in 2017. And from that point on, it became almost impossible for me to find work, at least through traditional means, sending in a resume to a business, because I guess they were Googling my name and finding out that I'm trans, or finding out that I'm associated with the BC Green Party, or something that they didn't like, because my success rate plummeted. I did the math on this. So I used to get 1 interview for every 2 resumes that I sent out. And for every 2 interviews that I did, I would get 1 job offer. After I was outed, that dropped to 1 interview for every 200 resumes that I sent out. And out of all the interviews that I did through those means, I never once got a job offer. That's something I have to be really conscious of, because it's really disheartening to put that much effort into something that doesn't have any success. And I hope the world has changed, that maybe I have new places that I can apply to that I can be assured would be more accepting. It's just a bit nerve-wracking to be in that situation. So I don't want to get into a place where I'm running low on money and I'm getting desperate and I accept a job that isn't a good fit, that doesn't treat me well, because I've been in that position way too many times in my life. Coming back to that running for election in 2017 piece, I ran for election in 2020. I ran for municipal election in 2018. And I'm going to be running for election again this year. I'm going to be a BC Green Party candidate in this upcoming election in October of this year. And that's going to occupy a huge amount of my time between now and then. So that's another factor to consider in all of this, is that while I'm looking for work, I have to have an understanding that this election campaign is going to be a challenging thing to work around. So if a job says, hey, can you work 9 to 5 for us? And then I have to say, sure, for the next few weeks, but then I have to take a month off. That's not a great look. So I need to be really upfront that this is something that I'm doing. And if an employer is interested in working with me around that, that's fantastic. If not, I don't want to burn that bridge too early or at all. Best case scenario, I also get elected, right? And then I have a job, and it's a job that I would be really passionate about. That adds a whole layer of uncertainty into the equation. The other piece of uncertainty is earlier this year, I bought tickets to Thailand and Vietnam for late October into early November. I don't want to cancel that trip. I don't think we bought refundable tickets, so I don't even think I can cancel that trip. Obviously, if I get elected, that might be a whole thing. And I mean, a great problem to have, to be honest. But if I don't, that'll be a great way to unwind after an election campaign. So one way or another, I'm not too worried about the trip aspect. But again, it throws uncertainty into the equation of potentially finding a job, right? I don't know a lot of things at this point. And you know, this podcast doesn't need to be a situation of me going too in-depth into that whole situation. That'll resolve itself however it resolves itself, and that's for the future to figure out. The last thing that I want to touch on is what happens to this podcast. I was getting paid to create this podcast for quite a while. I'm no longer going to be paid to make this podcast. That means I have to limit the amount of energy that I put into it. At the same time, I don't want this podcast to end. I love having these conversations, sharing wonderful discussions with really interesting people about social issues, because I think it's really important to have these conversations. I don't see other people doing it. So I think I'm filling a gap in the podcast sphere, market, whatever you want to call it. And I want to keep doing that. And I'm going to keep doing that. The owner of the flag shop does not want to keep this podcast. I've received texts. This was prior to the owner running off to France and not communicating with anyone. But I received communication that the website would be transferred to me. Basically, everything related to this would be transferred to me. All of the social media platforms are under my control. I've put the episodes on my personal website, so whether I get access to the Fabulously Queer website where it has been hosted or not, there will be a website where people can access those episodes. It's not going to be quite as professional because I'm not a website designer, but they will exist in some capacity. If any of you are website designers, and I wouldn't be able to pay you because this is entirely volunteer, but if you want to help make sure this podcast continues on and is as good as it can be, and you'd like to help with making this website look better or fulfilling some other role that you think would be valuable, I would love to hear from you. Please reach out to me. I will continue to post on social media as much as I can. I think you'll notice if you follow us on any of the platforms that we're on, whether that's YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Threads, that the short form content has slowed down. That was at least an hour a day that I was putting into that, and I simply don't have that time. So I'm still going to try to put that out there. It's just there's going to be probably less of it. I also have to figure out how to create short form content in the future, because I had a program that I was using through work that would chop up the podcast into short form. That was a paid subscription. Not having an income and trying to do this podcast as a volunteer thing, I can't justify spending huge amounts of money on, these types of programs. So I don't really know what that's all going to look like, but I'm going to do my best, I guess is all I'm going to say, to put content out as much as I can for you to enjoy, short form content that is, or posts on our various social media pages. As far as the audio, like what you're listening to right now, and the YouTube videos even, which I'm not creating a video for this because I just couldn't have this conversation with a camera on me. I couldn't think straight. That's why this one doesn't have a video. I am planning on still doing the videos for future podcasts. They'll probably be hosted in my living room. I have a nice art wall there that I can put behind me as a backdrop. I will have guests, not so much in person, although that might happen, but I'll have guests virtually joining me. That's how I'm going to proceed for now. I don't think from a listener perspective, you're going to notice very much difference. I'm going to do my best to make sure you don't notice the difference. So please rest assured that if this is a podcast that you enjoy and you're looking forward to new episodes, they're coming and they're going to be just as good as the previous ones, if not better, because I'm still always trying to improve. I don't really know how to wrap this up. I think I've gone over all of the points that I think are important for you to know, that are relevant to you as a listener and as someone who has seen this podcast associated with the flagship name. You might notice branding differences. There might be things that take a while to switch over. For instance, I changed the graphic for the podcast in the app that hosts the podcast, but it seems as though it hasn't updated on all of the other podcast sites. So you may still find instances where the flagship's name is mentioned. I'm just doing my best to make that transition with the very limited amount of time that I have at the moment. We just got through Pride weekend, so right now I'm editing a massive amount of Pride photos and photography for the soccer organizations I'm involved with, and all these boards that I sit on, and obviously the election campaign's coming up. So there's just so much on my plate at the moment. It's a little bit overwhelming, but I think once I'm through with all of the Pride and soccer photos, my schedule is going to be a little bit more manageable, more predictable maybe. I'm just kind of rambling at this point because this probably doesn't really matter to you, but I just don't know how to have this conversation. I'm so used to just being the person who interviews guests about a specific topic with pre-prepared questions, and I didn't pre-prepare anything other than a few bullet points of items I wanted to talk about for this conversation because I wanted it to feel as real and as authentic as possible. I wanted to just be open and honest with you. I didn't want it to seem like I was reading a script. Even if I were to write a script, I have no idea what I would do with that. Anyway, so let me just stop right there, stop rambling, let you know again that I appreciate all of you as an audience. I appreciate hearing from you. I want to see more of your engagement. I want to keep producing these episodes for you. I want to keep having important conversations about social issues, and I want to keep changing the world in a small little way. So I guess with that, this has been a social justice podcast. I'm your host, Nicola Spurling, and today has been a conversation about why I left the flag shop. I'll catch you for a more typical episode in the next one.
You've been listening to a social justice podcast, an exploration of our world's social issues, hosted by Nicola Spurling on the traditional and unceded territories of the Kwikwetlem, Katzie, and Qayqayt peoples.